CNN has let go of commentator Marc Lamont Hill after he made statements widely interpreted as calling for Israel's destruction and endorsing a violent resistance. A spokesperson for CNN confirmed he's no longer under contract. Lamont Hill told a UN panel he supports boycotts, divestments and sanctions against Israel and supports a free Palestine from the river to the sea. He defended his remarks on Twitter, saying it was a call for justice and all he wanted was a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with the right of return for Palestinian refugees.
In words, but to commit to political action, grassroots action, local action, and international action that will give us what justice requires. And that is a free Palestine from the river to the sea.
And here in the studio is Dr. Batya Ungar-Sargon, the opinion editor of the Forward. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Batya, do you think CNN was right to let go of Lamont Hill?
Listen, what I've been noticing is that on the left and on the right, there has been a kind of equivalence between the two problematic things that I think he said. The first was from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And the second was the call for armed resistance. Now, I think that those two things should be judged in very different ways. One is actually a call for violent resistance, which in the Palestinian case often targets civilians. And the other is a slogan that he says he did not mean to take away Jewish civil rights in the state of Israel, that he may or may not want to be the state of Israel. So I think it's very important that we distinguish between those two things.
And on which front do you think either of them, CNN was right to let go of this commentator for expressing his views, controversial and some might say repugnant as they may be?
I think they were very problematic. I do not claim to know how CNN should have handled this or not handled this. In general, I think a community, especially a minority, is not wrong when they say this was a dog whistle. And so I think if CNN wanted the Jewish community to not feel that they were allowing extremely offensive speech in their commentators, then it was correct for them to let him go. However, I think that more important is the fact that he's being called anti-Semitic, and I don't think that that is correct or accurate.
Well, let's take a listen to what he said, because he did say in his defense afterwards that he did call for a return to the 1967 borders, despite saying that he wanted Palestine to be free from the river to the sea. So let's just take a quick listen to that section from his speech.
Offers a non-violent means by which to demand a return to the pre-67 borders, full rights for Palestinian citizens, and the right of return as dictated by international law.
But yeah, he's calling for a return to the 1967 borders, but also the full return of Palestinian refugees. You're going to end up with two Palestinian states, one either side of the 1967 border, and that means no Israel, right?
I think he definitely, when he gave the UN speech, was not picturing a future in which there was a state of Israel, or even, frankly, a present in which there is a state of Israel. He didn't say the word Israel once.
And is that not anti-Semitic? Not mentioning Israel, but calling for a world in which the world's only Jewish state is wiped off the map?
Why do you think that's anti-Semitic?
Well, people would argue that the reason that it's anti-Semitic is that the Jews presently exercise and enjoy a right to self-determination, and seeking to take that right away from them, presumably not through their agreement, as he said, through violent resistance, is a violation of their right to the equal exercise of sovereignty.
He did not say that he doesn't want Jews to have the right to self-determination, civil rights. He did not say that he doesn't want Jews to have equal rights in this non-Jewish state. So I think it is wrong to call that anti-Semitic. It is a political statement. He is envisioning a non-Jewish state in which Jews and Palestinians have equal rights. I think that is a political statement and not a racist one. It's not about race. In fact, it's clear from what he said at the UN that his problem with Jews in Israel is that he sees them as whites. He sees them as a version of white supremacy. And so that is not really about Jews at all.
Which, of course, is historically just a bizarre way to look at a country that was formed from the detritus of Europe that was flung out by a white supremacist movement that genocided the Jews, and they weren't wanted by Europe because they weren't white enough, not to mention the half of Israel descended from Jews from the Arab world.
I think that there is something very cynical going on where groups bring African-American leaders to Israel. They show them scenes and situations that are very reminiscent just in the facts to what happens to African-Americans in America. But
and he did raise that. He did try to raise that link.
He made that exact comparison. However, of course, it is not the same. Of course, when cops shoot black people in America, that is not at all related to security. They are completely blameless. Whereas here, there is a security concern. Palestinians do sometimes end up having violent resistance against Jews and against Jewish civilians. So that is the first way in which it's not similar. Another way in which it's not similar is it's not racist, right? Palestinians in Israel proper have full civil rights. It's Palestinians in the West Bank who actually have no civil rights. And so that is really the problem here. It's not about the race. It's not about being Palestinian. It's about where you live. Now, of course, I think that they should have civil rights in both areas and that, you know, toot sweet Israel should be looking to that and finding ways to. So in a way, a lot of what he said was actually accurate. There are civil rights problems. There are even a few civil rights problems here in Israel as well. However, it's a question of how you frame that. And I think that, you know, we're seeing this again and again. People like Tamika Mallory, Marc Lamont Hill, even Andrew Gillum, that they're being associated with this group and they're coming here and they're making false comparisons and they're really being manipulated. They come back to America, they say things that are inaccurate about Israel in a tone that upsets Jewish leaders and Jews all around, and then the Jews get upset and end up in this kerfuffle.
You know, many Jews believe that were there to be a single binational state, that would be an existential threat to the Jewish people. We'd end up with a perpetual civil war between Israelis and Palestinians fighting over the same land, and Jews would not be safe living within a one-state solution. So if you are proposing a political solution that would impose on a minority a reality that they say is an existential threat to them, and you insist that in the name of your principles you get to impose this terrifying reality on them, is that not a mark of prejudice against them? Is that not what is anti-Semitic about denying Israel's right to exist?
I don't think you can call someone a bigot because you think that if their thing happens that they're proposing, then the next step and the next step and the next step will entail something that you don't like. That is not what anti-Semitism is.
No, but the Jews say, look, we currently enjoy a right to self-determination. You are coming and trying to take away our collective right to self-determination in a way that would make us fearful for our existence. You're not taking our concerns and our lived experience seriously.
Again, I think that this is a political question about whether Jews, look, Jews in America enjoy the right to self-determination, right? We have full civil rights. We are very happy there, and we're not moving here, right? We feel completely...
You're welcome if you'd like to.
Yeah, maybe when you give me the right to divorce my husband without his consent, I'll think about it. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the question of look, I don't agree with anything that Marc Lamont said. I think he said very problematic things, very upsetting things. Calling for armed resistance against civilians is a huge red line, and I think that all decent people should stand up against that. However, I don't think it's fair to call someone anti-Semitic because they're proposing a political solution to a real, legitimate political problem that you happen to not like.
Okay, well, let's have a look from a slightly different angle. You were discussing before Marc Lamont Hill raising that connection with black history in the United States to support his call for Palestinian resistance, possibly violent resistance. With an eye on that CNN poll, looked at Europe, but also rising examples of anti-Semitism in the United States. So what extent do you think that affiliation between identifying black history with Palestinian history is causing anti-Semitism within the African-American community in the United States?
Again, I don't think that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. I think one is political and one is racism. It's bigotry against the people because of their race.
Is organized racism not itself political?
Do you think it is?
These are absolutely a movement that forms around prejudice against a particular people that calls for a certain plan of action against them is innately political.
I would say that Israel has a political problem. It has a civil rights problem. Do you agree with that?
Of course.
Right. So we have a political problem that requires a political solution.
But I'm saying anti-Semitism, too, is political. You can't say that these are two separate issues.
Well, it can be politicized. It can be politicized. I wouldn't say that it's political. It's bigotry. It's racism. It's a hatred.
But it's always been an attempt to mobilize society against the Jews on a political platform, is it not?
Yeah, but not every attempt to mobilize people, you know what I mean? Like, not every attempt to mobilize people is itself a form of politics. But without getting too deep into it...
Without getting too deep into it, we have to go to a break. Batya Ungar-Sasson from Sargon from the Forward.